Thanks so much for joining me. Today we are talking all about yoga injuries and healthy hamstrings. So I want to share with y'all my experience of actually tearing my hamstring back when I was in my early 20s, and that happened during a yoga class. And it's not at all to villainize yoga. That is by no means my intention. It's my hope that in sharing this story with y'all, maybe some of you will be able to make more informed and empowered decisions and avoid the experience that I had. So, thanks again for joining me. My name is Linnea Rothenmeier, and I have gone from being an injured circus performer with 10 years of chronic neck pain to now being the owner and founder of my own rehabilitative Pilates and personal training studio with a focus on corrective exercise and functional fitness. So thanks again so much for joining me. We are talking about yoga injuries and healthy hamstrings. I do these live video tutorials every single Wednesday at 11 a.m. So you can join me here on Facebook. I also will put the replay in YouTube so you can watch that there. I post the topic on Mondays, so I'm always inviting your questions and your comments, and I love to just kind of riff off of you guys so that I kind of see what you're interested in hearing about, and we'll go from there. So yes, I am still learning to use also this thing that is helping me organize my notes. So let's just get started. So I want to tell you the story of what happened to me when I was in this yoga class. And if we travel back in time, there I was in my early 20s. I was determined to make it as an aerial circus performer. And, I was doing things like stretching my splits every single 12 hours, like every morning, every night. I did that for months and months and months to get to a place where I could really fully do the splits. I was traveling around the entire country, really taking different workshops and intensives with kind of all the big names in contemporary circus. And during that whole time, yoga was really a huge part of my daily practice. It's something that I did for cross training. It's also something that I did to kind of balance my somewhat anxious mind, and I loved the kind of mind, body, and spiritual aspect of the practice. At that time, I actually had a pretty negative impression of kind of the broader fitness industry in general. I really thought that personal training was something that was only for people that were obsessed with losing weight. And either that or kind of vainly wanting to sculpt their muscles. That's all I thought that personal training was. And so I had placed yoga on this pedestal full of all of this ancient wisdom and spirituality. And I just thought that because I was doing yoga, I was just leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else. I just kind of had this somewhat naive mindset about it, I guess. But at the same time, I was really naturally very athletic. I was naturally very competitive. And so basically all of that brought me to Ashtanga yoga, which is a very rigorous and somewhat traditional form of yoga. There's kind of this atmosphere of, total trust in the instructor and just this energy of deep discipline that permeates the room. So things like super strong hands-on adjustments from the instructor were really common. And that was kind of just the setting that I was in. And so there I was. I was sitting down in this pose. I'm not going to remember the Sanskrit name for it, but your knees are out to the sides, your feet are together, and there I was trying to get my head down to my feet, and then from there I was like trying to bring my like arms through my legs and get my feet behind my head, right? So that's what I was working on. And I think the instructor might have even like completely stood on my legs with her whole body weight. I can't really remember exactly, but I do remember my hamstring snapping. It was so loud. She heard it, I heard it. It was just like, boom. I knew something really bad had just happened. And yikes, it was like literally the sound of my hamstring tearing. And that was over 10 years ago now. And it's like, I still carry this imbalance in my body. It still affects the way that my body moves today, and it might have really contributed to some bigger injuries that I had a little bit down the road from that point. So, you know, I don't think I even rehabbed it super well. I can't totally remember, but I remember like sitting on ice packs, right? Like it's right at the base of your hip. So I remember like sitting on an ice pack, and I remember just kind of waiting for it to get better. And the reason why I really want to share that story with you is, again, not to villainize yoga at all, but actually just to talk a little bit more specifically about what is a healthy hamstring. Like, what are we talking about when we're talking about healthy hamstrings, healthy hips, the effects that that can have for your knees, for your low back, and ultimately to hopefully like make better choices in yoga, right? And make better choices just with how you're keeping your body healthy and happy. Even if you're not trying to be like a circus performer like I was back in that day, or not practicing maybe like a really aggressive form of yoga. So, you know, back then my worldview was definitely skewed towards like overvaluing flexibility, right? I was trying to be a circus performer. But what I was really unaware of was what it looked like to have like a functional range of motion and functional strength around my hamstrings. Like I had no idea what that looked like. I just sort of thought more flexibility was better. And I had put so much trust into yoga that I just thought like, oh, well, that's just great, right? And I didn't even really cross my mind that like you could have too much flexibility. And it's so silly now because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so obvious, right? But it was just kind of part of drinking the Kool-Aid, for at least that was my experience, you know. And I see this all the time to this day, even with people that are just trying to kind of keep their body healthy and fit and just kind of find something that they enjoy in terms of fitness. And you know, overstretching your hamstrings can lead to things like muscle imbalance, and I often see it even lead to injury. So that is why I'm really talking about this today. Okay, so let's talk more specifically about what it means to have healthy hips and healthy flexibility in your hamstrings, healthy strength, and kind of how to know if you've got that imbalance or if it's out of balance. Okay, especially because in yoga, like stretching your hamstrings, stretching the back of your legs is like such a quintessential part of almost every class that I think it's important to talk about. So, okay, so what's the hamstring? Right, what are we even talking about here? The hamstring is the muscle at the back of your thigh. It kind of goes from the back of your knee up to the back of your pelvis. And it's responsible for bending your knee and also for kind of pulling down the back of your pelvis. And another way to say that is to say that your hamstring is really important for kind of slowing down and preventing hyperextension of your knee. You don't want your knee to go past straight, right? Like that'd be a hyperextension of the knee. And it also prevents and slows down compression of the low back. Okay, so we want to have a hamstring that is like doing something. We want it to be doing those jobs. And if it's a little bit too flexible and kind of just like long and noodly and out to lunch, then that's not such a great scenario for our knees and for our low back. Okay, so let's do this super simple exercise together, my friends. You can do this in jeans, you can do this in slacks, you can do this with a skirt on. So let's all hop up and try this right now. It only takes like a minute or two. And this is a really simple way for you to kind of test and assess for yourself like what's going on with your own hamstrings and kind of the posture around your hips and your low back. So thanks again for joining me. We're talking all about healthy hamstrings and kind of what can go wrong in yoga and yoga injuries and things like that. Okay, so, and I have actually not done my morning routine yet. I'm like noticing that I have these kind of imbalances, so it'll be perfect to show you what this can look like. Okay, so I'm kind of tilting my screen down a little bit here. You're gonna stand up, and I'm gonna turn to the side, so you can do this with me, you can watch and then do it on your own time. But you're basically just gonna stand, you can stand and use a mirror and look at your low back from the side. And the first thing that you want to look at is to see if you've got like a little bit of a sway in your low back, and you just kind of notice like what's the shape of the back of your thigh and the back of your pelvis doing, right? So from there, if you have more of a sway in the low back here, it can be a sign that your hamstrings are too flexible and too long, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at. We're doing this little exercise, right? The next thing you can do from there, just kind of looking and seeing what your static posture is you can do a little bit of a pelvic tilt and just kind of rock your pelvis back and forth. And as you do that, you can feel like, for one, you can feel if your knees bend as you kind of go into this, I call it a sway back posture, right? So do your knees bend when you go like this, or do you actually kind of hyperextend and lock out your knees? I know you can't quite see my face and you can't quite see my knees, but you can see a little bit that my legs are moving backwards as I do this, right? So there's a little bit of this like hyperextension in the knees, and I'm going quite sway back. And I can tell you, it doesn't really feel very good. This is sort of an example of like what we don't necessarily want to see in our hamstrings, okay? The opposite of that would be to actually kind of softly bend the knees as you tilt forward. And what that does is it creates a little more integrity in the back of the hamstring that kind of slows down the tilt of the pelvis and puts less strain into the low back. Okay, so I know that can be a little bit confusing to figure out for yourself, but you'll know if you kind of look in the mirror and just do that simple little pelvic tilt and kind of look at the shape of your low back. You'll know if you kind of live a little bit more in that position versus like if you have a really flat butt and like to really drop your the back of your pelvis down, right? So if you have a resting posture with a little bit more of an arch in your low back, or your knees like to hyperextend and you just kind of lock out your knees, maybe both of those things, it could be really a sign that you might be overstretching your hamstrings. If you feel that your knees kind of hyperextend or move into a straighter position when you go to arch your low back and do that little pelvic tilt, that's definitely a sign that the hamstrings might be a little overly long or just kind of like not quite awake, I guess I'll say. And this is really important because if we maybe actually strengthen our hamstrings a little bit, it might actually help support the low back and support healthy knees and healthy hips, right? So of course there's going to be folks that have the opposite, that have like super tight hamstrings. Like those people are out there, and it's actually super funny because those are the people that probably would be better served going to yoga. But it often can be the other way around, right? Oftentimes the folks that have super tight hamstrings, they feel maybe a little intimidated from going to yoga. They feel like maybe they're not in the right place. And I often see, like this was me back in my early 20s, like I had naturally flexible hamstrings. I was naturally really good at yoga. And so I wanted to do more of it, right? And so I see that as well a lot. Like people that are already quite naturally flexible, they kind of find themselves doing a lot of yoga and then stretching their hamstrings more and more. And that is like maybe not the best recipe for creating a nice, healthy, well-balanced hip, low back, and knee, structure. So we have to kind of check in with ourselves a little bit with this. We have to be like, wait, am I doing this because I'm already good at it? Or am I doing this because it's really challenging my body to kind of restore and rebalance and give back what's missing into my body? So, you know, it can be pretty tricky to figure these things out for yourself. It took me many, many years of professional development, of working with my own body, of going to physical therapy, of, you know, hiring different movement professionals to help me figure out what was going on. In addition to doing this professionally and working with hundreds and hundreds of clients and watching thousands of bodies move. And, you know, it's like through all of that experience, I have really started to see these patterns and I can see them more quickly. But it can be really tricky at first, right? It can just kind of be like, I don't know, like I feel stiff, so let's go to yoga or something like that. So this is really one of the reasons why I created the group class FSP. FSP stands for Functional Strength and Pilates, and it is a weekly group class. It happens Mondays at 12 o'clock live. You can come in person, you can come online, and there's also access to the replay. So even if you can't come live on Mondays at noon, you can pop into the class and take class via the recording from anywhere. And I've also really specifically designed this class to have a component of functional strength and functional mobility. Because if we're talking about healthy hamstrings and we're talking about kind of the flexibility of the hips, in addition to the strength of the hips, you know, we can kind of get stuck in a pattern of thinking of it as like an either or, like either we're working on strength or we're working on flexibility. And really, when we actually start to look at functional movement patterns, that sort of dichotomy kind of breaks down. It actually becomes just kind of one and the same. We need the mobility in order to have the strength. We need the strength in order to have integrity within our flexibility. So that is why I created this group class, because it is an accessible way for you to be able to benefit from all of this experience and expertise that I've cultivated over kind of years, if not decades at this point. And yeah, so I hope you join me. Your first class is free. You can simply go to www.limberarts.com/FSP. And you can sign up. You'll use the code LimberArts to register. Feel free to comment below and I can send you that link directly. DM me and I can send you the link. Feel free to ask more questions below. If there's anything you're like, wait, I'm not sure, ask a question to clarify. Feel free to send me a DM to ask a question as well, like no strings attached, just happy to chat. So yeah, that is it for today, my friends. Thank you again so much for watching. Let me know what you've discovered, what your key takeaways are from watching this video. What's going on with your hamstrings? Are they too flexible? Are they too strong? It's kind of like Goldilocks, like, are you right in the middle? And let me know if there's a topic you'd like me to talk about next week. I'm always curious to hear your feedback, and I will see you guys next time. Bye for now.